President Trump delivers a mind-blowing speech at the Knesset as the 20 remaining live hostages return home from 2 years in brutal Hamas captivity. He then meets with Muslim, Arab, and European leaders in Egypt to seal his plan for Middle East peace. But Hamas has already violated the first phase of the deal. What are the chances of the plan being fully implemented? This and more on Israel Undiplomatic.
Shalom and welcome to another episode of Israel Undiplomatic. I'm Mark Regev, and as per usual, I'm here with my co-host, Ruthie Blum. Ruthie, what a week. And I'd like to remind you, Ruthie, that in last week's podcast, which we did like a few hours before the deal came to fruition, you were a bit skeptical. I was a touch more upbeat. In the end, I was right to be upbeat.
You were absolutely right. And it's interesting because I have to say, in this week, it feels like a year has passed since our last broadcast. Because it wasn't just that President Trump came up with the deal and that Prime Minister Netanyahu accepted the deal. Hamas responded at some point with a memo that really said it wasn't accepting the deal. It pretended to, but everything in its memo said no, not yes. And President Trump did something that got me very nervous, but it turned out to be clever. What he said was, he announced on Truth Social, Hamas has accepted the deal. And I thought, oy vey, Hamas didn't accept the deal. Everything in its letter was completely the opposite. But because Trump did that, it kind of pressured Hamas and the other leaders to act as though that was happening and sort of lay down the law. Then I didn't believe that when I said all 20, the first phase is that all 20 live hostages, actually, it was all 48 hostages, have to be returned to Israel in one fell swoop within 72 hours. Nobody believed that was going to happen. But thank God, the 20 living hostages were returned in one group, you could say. And the deceased were not until the following day, and we'll discuss that later. But what I will say is it was this amazing scene because President Trump's arrival to Israel virtually coincided with the release of those hostages. And we'll get to that. He came to address the Knesset. First, he was going to land at Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv, and then be taken to Jerusalem with Netanyahu, and meet with him and meet with some of the families of the hostages who had already been released in previous deals. And then he was going to address the Knesset. But he landed late at Ben Gurion Airport, so he was late to all the others. And after the Knesset speech, he went right to Egypt for this summit of all these leaders. So now you tell me how you felt when that was happening.
First of all, I mean, obviously you're correct in most of what you say, but I know I disagree with one thing that you said. You said Trump came up with a plan and Netanyahu accepted it. And I think it's a touch more complicated. And in fact, I think that's not true what you said. There was a discussion, you'll recall, about 6 weeks ago at the White House where they discussed the day after of Gaza, the day after the war in Gaza, which is many of the things in this plan. And who was invited? Ron Dermer from Israel. And I know intuitively that that's a sign that this plan wasn't a surprise to Israel. It doesn't mean that we didn't have discussions. Trump said in his speech that Netanyahu held tough on all sorts of issues and there was difficult negotiations. But the idea that the Americans came up with this plan that surprised Israel, that it came out of the blue, in your words, that he came up with the plan and Netanyahu accepted, I think there was very, very good Israeli-American coordination on this plan, that it was worked out. It didn't mean, once again, Trump said Netanyahu fought very hard on separate issues to make sure that Israel's interests were looked after, that the plan, the Trump plan, would in fact cover the Israeli war goals, that Hamas must be disarmed, that all the hostages must be released and that Gaza will no longer be a military threat to Israel. It'll be demilitarized. All that is in the Trump plan, and it's not accidental. It's because I think the negotiations between Netanyahu and Trump, between Ron Dermer and the Trump team, I think that was the precursor, that was the necessary element to make this work and be so successful.
Yes, well, I'll take it a step further. Everybody knows now that actually Ron Dermer wrote that plan.
No, that might be overstating it.
Not sure. I
Yes?
mean, I have it on great authority that is what happened. But again, as all lawyers will tell you, it doesn't matter what's in a contract. It only matters who signs it.
Correct.
So yes, they did, of course, negotiate, etc. Because the last part of the plan involves the far future path to a Palestinian self-rule, something like that. All kinds of things that we know, we've heard all that before. But what makes this plan so different, and as I said, it doesn't matter. You're right. It's called Trump's plan. And yes, Israel was instrumental in writing it. And so did, as was acknowledged by Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner and Trump himself. So there's no issue there. But it's a beautiful plan because it puts the onus on Hamas. And the very first phase is first you release the hostages. Then we release terrorists from jails. I mean, it's a shame we had to do that at all, okay? But nevertheless, we agreed to that.
What Trump did do that was crucial in the success, and we spoke about this last week, was that Trump got Hamas's allies and friends in the Arab and Muslim world to endorse the plan for their own reasons. Not because they like Israel,
No,
but for their own reasons. And I think that made, together with the Israeli military pressure, that diplomatic pressure from Hamas's allies to Hamas, from the Turks, from the Qataris, and so forth. And I think only Trump could make that difference because Trump had the leverage with the Qataris and with the Turks for them to put the pressure on Hamas to accept this deal.
Absolutely, no question about it. Okay, so what we see here, we've seen an incredible dance between the White House and Jerusalem. We've seen it throughout this war, well, actually, not throughout this war, since Donald Trump entered the White House. And, it's been, I would say, as you point out, the combination of military pressure and what you call diplomatic pressure from all those Hamas-supporting countries on Hamas. But I would add, it's important to stress that the pressure that was not helpful, in my opinion, were the demonstrations in the streets, bring him home, and Netanyahu, if the hostages are killed, the blood is on your hands. Those protests were not helpful at all. And but I want to say we'll get back to that issue with the hostages. But let's talk about Trump's monumental speech to the Knesset. There's never been anything like it. First of all, he was only the fourth president in history to address the Knesset. And it was incredible.
First of all, I agree, and we'll talk about Trump's speech, but I want to talk before that. He had to sit through 3 speeches of Israeli leaders, and I'm sure it wasn't that easy for the president to have to sit there and politely wait for everyone else to finish their speeches. But the Speaker of the Knesset, Amir Ohana, spoke, I thought, very well. After that, Netanyahu gave a very good speech, and that was followed by the opposition leader, Lapid, who also, I thought, gave, maybe it's a matter of expectations and so forth. Following Netanyahu is not easy, who's a great speaker, but he also, I thought, gave a very solid and good speech. I want to pick on one thing that Netanyahu says, which I think it made me think of something that I hadn't thought of before. He said when October 7th happened, the whole world supported Israel because it was just in the aftermath of the terrible Hamas atrocities. And the combination of that diplomatic support with the military pressure Israel was applying allowed for the first release of prisoners, that first group of hostages who were released. And then he said, slowly Israel lost the diplomatic support of the world, and there was no release of prisoners because all the pressure was on Israel. And he said that flipped in December 2024 when Trump was reelected. Suddenly, Hamas agreed to another release, and this final release. And he was saying sort of that the election of Trump was a pivotal moment in the war, in changing the dynamic in a positive way to Israel. And I think I hadn't thought about it that way before, but it made me think that, yes, Trump's victory was instrumental in changing the momentum into a positive direction. Israel could apply the military pressure, but with Trump applying the diplomatic pressure, that was the game changer. I think that he did things that Biden couldn't or wouldn't do. Couldn't or wouldn't, you'll decide, Ruthie. But Trump's role here has been pivotal. I even heard, just to sum it up, and I think it needs to be said, there's this show on PBS where they have two people doing the weekly news on the NewsHour. And David Brooks, who's theoretically a Republican, but a very anti-Trump Republican, yeah?
Yeah.
He said, he paid Trump a compliment. He never pays Trump's compliment about getting this deal. And he said, the truth is, Trump has done more for stability and peace in the Middle East than Obama and Biden, who came in with all these plans. Yes, and it's 100% true. And here, we can now talk about Trump. But there's no doubt that in getting this successful outcome to the war in Gaza, Trump really deserves everyone's acclamation. And you know what's interesting? Across the planet, the left hates Trump. The British left hates Trump. The Australian left hates Trump.
The
Canadian left, the American left hates Trump. Where does the left like Trump? Only in Israel. Only in Israel. In Israel, and we saw in the collapse in the Knesset, there was wall to wall, the left, the center, the right. Everyone likes Trump. Everyone knows that he got our hostages out and helped us get this deal.
Oh, he's a rock star in Israel. And the left, who used to also hate him in Israel, but because of his involvement in getting the hostages released, they just loved him. And they went to visit him a lot, the families of the hostages. Everything you say is right. But when you mention Obama and Biden and all the Democrats, their view of diplomacy is, everybody, let's make peace, and Israel will give you territory, and we'll lie down and play dead. And Obama said, I'm leading from behind, and America is not greater than any other country. Of course Trump is doing more, because Trump says peace through strength. Trump joined Israel in the attack on Iranian nuclear facilities. Trump changed back the name of the Defense Department in the United States to the War Department. It used to be called that, and it became the Department of Defense. It's now Department of War. Pete Hegseth is called the Secretary of War, not Defense. And Trump, with all his flowery language, and when he went to Saudi Arabia, and he speaks really highly of the Emir of Qatar and all these people in Turkey and all these basically Islamist bad guys, who, especially Qatar and Turkey and all of those who fund and support Hamas. But here's what he does. He flatters the way he did with Putin. He flattered Putin repeatedly, humiliated Zelensky at the White House, and now the tables have turned. You know why? Because he said, yeah, Putin's a great guy, and he's going to do this and going to make peace and all that. And when Putin didn't do what he wanted, he's now against Putin. He says, I'm going to maybe give weapons to Zelensky. And that's important, because I think what we're seeing here is he's telling us it's carrots and sticks. And these countries all believe. They want the carrots, and they believe the sticks. His threats are credible, and that makes him completely different from any Democrat. That's why I don't like the word diplomacy. It's not exactly diplomacy. It's something else entirely. He has asserted American power around the globe, thank God, ignoring the wing of his party that is isolationist, that hates Israel, etc. And it is very telling that in his Knesset speech, he said that Secretary of State Marco Rubio is the greatest Secretary of State in history, is what he said. And you know why that's crucial? Because J.D. Vance, who's his vice president, is in the isolationist wing, and Marco Rubio is not. And I think that he was indicating that that actually, don't think I'm with you guys, you isolationists, because I'm not. I'm with the Rubio camp. Furthermore, he is, so as I said, a lot of people I know on the right in Israel and abroad have said this is a terrible deal because it talks about a Palestinian state. Don't worry about it. They don't want a state. They just want to destroy Israel. There's not going to be that in international forces. I'm also against those. But this is a completely different deal. It says If this doesn't happen, then that won't happen. It makes it different from every other peace deal that Israel has ever been involved with. You hear the word peace, you know that bloodshed is about to follow. Duck is what you say to yourself.
I want to say something that Trump said for the upteenth time when he was here. He said the war would never have happened if he had been president on October 7th, 2023. And a lot of people just dismiss this, maybe correctly, as typical Trump bravado. He likes to exaggerate and so forth. But I want to stress that there could be a certain amount of truth in that. And I want to explain why. The outgoing deputy head of Israel military intelligence, the man that was in his position October 7th, 2023, and left his post because of that, he was talking about the reasons for October 7th. Why did Hamas attack us when they attacked us? And he gave the reasons we all understand. We've heard before that they were afraid of the deal, possible reconciliation between Israel and Saudi Arabia, that they thought the country was falling apart. Israel's a paper tiger. The military is falling apart because of the people who were refusing to serve in the military and so forth. And he also said something that I hadn't thought about before. You remember there was that Biden-Netanyahu rift. And that Biden was asked a couple of times publicly, when are you inviting Netanyahu or are you inviting Netanyahu to the White House? And he said, no. And this guy, who's a professional military analyst, obviously with a blemished record, yes, but he said that because of the obvious public friction between Netanyahu and Biden saying, I'm not inviting him to the White House, that gave our enemies, Hamas, Hezbollah and Iran, the sort of feeling, because they don't understand how politics works in democracies, they don't live in them, yes? The feeling that, Israel is alone, its biggest ally is no longer with it. And that's not the only reason, but one of the contributing factors to the Hamas attack on October 7th. His words, not mine. Fast forward to that speech we saw in the Knesset this week with Trump, right? When America stands strongly behind Israel, when people see two allies who celebrate their partnership, who celebrate their alliance, that when Netanyahu says we have no better friend in the world than the United States of America, and Trump says Israel is our friend and ally and we will stick by Israel, and if you need to finish the job militarily, we'll step. That actually is a force for deterrence and stability. When the Obama administration came into office, I remember they said very clearly, we want to have daylight between us, and that's good for peace, to have daylight. We'll be some sort of honest broker. The contrary is true. The contrary is true. When America stands strongly with Israel, that puts all those people who are against peace and against stability and want to do bad stuff like Hamas, that gives them a feeling, we can come out of our holes and do our dirty work, yes? But when America stands strongly with Israel, that's when you get the Abraham Accords, that's when you can get progress, that's when you get stability. And maybe, had we had a speech like that from Trump a month before October 7th wouldn't have happened.
Well, if Trump had been in the White House for a second term after his first term, when he did amazing things, not just the Abraham Accords, he put his whole support behind Israel. He recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. He moved the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem. He recognized sovereignty over the Golan Heights. He ripped up the Iran deal. He did one thing after the other. If he had stayed a second term, things would have looked different. And by the way, now what you can see is all these world leaders scrambling. He can't stand them. He's not fond of the leaders of France and England and the UK. And Canada. He has put his foot down to their disgusting recognition of the Palestinian state at the UN General Assembly. And the fact that he made that Knesset speech right before getting on a plane to go to meet with all of those leaders and Turkish President Erdogan and the Emir of Qatar and al-Sisi of Egypt and all of this, that was a statement. That was a statement to the world. He didn't just say we're allies. He said, I love Israel. He even made reference to his son-in-law being Jewish and how his daughter converted to marry him and how he loves Israel. He just repeated it again and again and again. I am with Israel. And then to get on a plane. Now, Egypt and Israel are so close. I can't. How long was that plane ride? Half an hour? I don't even know.
45 minutes. I've
They-
done that flight.
45 minutes. Okay.
Mm.
Nothing. All right. And they, for sure, were all sitting in their venue in the hotel in Sharm el-Sheikh. I guess it was in a hotel. I'm sure, all watching and listening to that speech. And that was amazing. And I would like to just add one thing, and you and I are going to talk about this as well. The Israeli protest movement loved Trump, and they loved Witkoff. Witkoff, I have to say, Trump said this in his speech as well, that Witkoff seems to be a really nice guy because everybody seems to love him. And it's true. We saw that with the hostage families. They love Witkoff. And I've never met him, and he must be a nice guy. But when he went, he made a speech at Hostage Square after it was announced that the hostages would be coming home. And the Hostage Square was filled with tens of thousands of people cheering, saying, "Thank you, Trump. We love you, Trump." Again and again. It was like hysteria. And Witkoff gave a lovely speech. And every time he said something, they cheered, cheered, cheered. And then he said, "And now I would like to say to Prime Minister Netanyahu," and the crowd booed and hissed. And Witkoff kept saying, "Okay, could you let me say what I want to say?" And what he wanted to say was that Netanyahu and Ron Dermer, they also booed Ron Dermer, that they were crucial. They played a crucial role in getting these hostages home, a crucial role in ending the war, etc. But nope, the crowd was disgusting, and it wasn't the whole crowd, but it was enough. There was enough chanting of booing that you could hear it very clearly because there were several thousand booing him. Then President Trump, again in the Knesset, he made a point of stressing how crucial Netanyahu was in winning this war, and that's another thing. That's another thing that distinguishes him from those Democrats, that there is such a thing as winning, as victory, as strength. Not all of this, we're just citizens of the globe. No. And thank God for him. What can I say?
About the booing of Netanyahu in Hostage Square. So I agree with what you're saying. That also, I thought this is just out of line. This is the man has agreed to a deal, right? That he's been, as I said before, he was part of forming the deal to get all the hostages out when everyone thought it was impossible to get all the hostages out in advance, yes, as a down payment. And, when Witkoff also thanked the Turkish president, they clapped. A man who's, said all sorts of anti-Semitic things, the crowd claps. When he thanks the Qataris, everyone claps. When he said, Jared Kushner said, "We feel sorry for all the innocent civilians in Gaza killed," they clap, but only for Netanyahu do they boo. And I agree with you, it's not the whole crowd, but there's definitely part of the motivation behind, and we can say it now that all the hostages, I'm not talking about the families, and thank God they've got their loved ones back alive, and hopefully all the people with the dead hostages will be coming home soon. But there's no doubt that the hostage movement was used by the opposition to Netanyahu for political purposes. There's no doubt about that. And that was clear in that booing. It was really, imagine in front of you, we can have all our arguments, but in front of a foreign leader who's celebrating the return of the hostage, it really was, I think, unnecessary, and it exposed, I think, some of these activists for who and what they are. As we go forward, we have to say what Trump said yesterday was just as important as anything he said in the Knesset, because, a lot will depend now. The live hostages are out. Hopefully, the hostages who are no longer among the living will be coming home in the coming days, all of them. And we should, once again, if Hamas starts playing games, from our point of view as Israel, it's a deviation, it's breaking the deal, and then we don't have to do our obligations to, right? They have an obligation to release all the dead hostages, and they have to do that. If they don't do it, we don't have to continue with the sort of things that Israel is committed to do in this process. But there's a whole bigger question after that issue is done, is the issue of what will happen in Gaza when this is over. And that yesterday the president reiterated that Hamas has to be disarmed. And he even said they will be disarmed. And once again, like he said when he spoke about Iran once, one way or another, he said, they promised me, they committed to me that they're going to disarm. If they don't do it, it'll happen anyway. In other words, saying it can be done the nasty way, which is Israel using force, which is also something Netanyahu said in his speech. Right? If they disarm. Now, what is the Hamas game plan? Then they haven't suddenly become Boy Scouts, right? They've been military defeated, but they want to, they want to arise from their ashes and recreate themselves and rebuild themselves. It's clear that's what they want to do. They haven't had some sort of, vision. They've suddenly become, nice people. They're bloodthirsty terrorists. And their model is Hezbollah in Lebanon. They want to be the power behind the scenes. They want to be the people with guns. They don't care. There can be some sort of, other government, but they want to run Gaza and they want to be the people, the power behind the scenes. They want to be the people with the guns. That's their plan. And that Trump was so unequivocal that we reject that possibility. That's not going to happen. And one way or another, that is not going to happen, either, as I say, the nice way or the hard way. I thought that was a crucial supplement to everything he said when he was in Israel.
Yes, well, he said it even more specifically. He said, if they don't disarm, we'll disarm them. And when asked how, he said, I don't have to talk about that, but they know I'm serious. That's what he said. We'll disarm them. Now, when he says we, again, he means Israel. That's what's so incredible. He doesn't mean he's going to send American troops there to do it, but he used the word we. Again, you see, this is incredible. And Israel never expected American boots on the ground. We didn't need American boots on the ground. We needed that support, that backing, also weapons. But I'm not talking about the weapons. I'm talking about and standing up to. So Netanyahu, by the way, it's not just that the crowd shouldn't have booed him because he agreed to a deal. He has been working round the clock for 2 years fighting this war. And it's shocking and shameful that was their response. And you're right. They have a chance. There's going to be an election. They don't want to vote for him. Don't vote for him. It just was an appalling scene. And as I said, even Steve Witkoff now, Steve Witkoff is no stranger to vile behavior like that. Why? Because Trump also has the anybody but Trump, the Trump derangement syndrome people are perfectly capable of doing that too. All the people who said we're leaving the country if Trump is elected, and they call him a fascist and they call him a Nazi, so it's not as though I think that's part of the reason that Witkoff kind of laughed, with embarrassment when the crowd was doing that. He knows who those people are, and they're just like the American left that does that to Trump.
I want to talk about two side issues, maybe from Trump's visit to Israel. One was a visual image. And it wasn't really mentioned much by the Israeli media because for the Israeli media it's normal, but I thought it was a good picture. And I'm not sure everyone who saw the pictures from the Trump visit actually noticed this. There's a wonderful picture of Trump in the middle, and on his right, Benjamin Netanyahu and Sarah Netanyahu, and on his left, the Speaker of the Knesset and his husband. And I thought that picture said much more about modern Israel than many of the other pictures. Because, we're two democracies. But let's remember this fundamentally about Israel. That Israel, unlike our neighbors, and unlike everything that Hamas and Hezbollah stand for, Israel is a liberal country with a little L, yes, in the true sense of the word. We are a pluralist country. We are a country of equality under the law. We are a country that gives rights to people, and no matter what their sexual orientation. And even people like that can achieve highest positions in the government, in this case, Speaker of the Knesset. And that's something that we don't talk about in Israel because it's natural. But I remember that photograph of the five of them. That made me smile.
It's interesting you're saying that because it's so natural that I didn't even notice it. I mean, it's not that I didn't see the photo. It's that I didn't even think there was something to note about it. And that's very important what you're saying. It's so much a part of us that I didn't even notice it. Speaking of Amir Ohana, the Speaker of the Knesset, who's openly gay, and he and his husband have 2 children. The reason I'd like to raise him for a minute is he said years ago, I've interviewed him, I've written about him, he's a wonderful guy. But one of the things he said is that growing up in where he grew up in a development town and all this, and he's from a North African background. I mean, his parents are Moroccan, and they tend to be usually not that woke and modern. And he said, no, no, my coming out of the closet as gay, that wasn't a problem there. It was my coming out as a member of the right wing, as the Likud party among the gays. That is unacceptable. And the gay community hates him, and they demonstrate against him. They think of him as someone who betrays
I
them.
think you have to say the organized leadership of the gay community.
Right,
Yeah.
but they're mostly so. He said, he said, what does he doesn't go to gay pride parades and all that. He said, what does my sexual orientation preference have to do with my opposition to a Palestinian state? It was said so perfectly. And why is that relevant right now to this whole thing? Because Trump's battling, very seriously, battling the whole woke-osphere. And the trans, there is such hysteria about transgender in America, young people, young children transitioning, and men being women in sports, and all of this stuff. And why is that important for me to mention? Because Amir Ohana is also against wokeism. Being gay in Israel, being who you are, nobody denies that. And the same thing in America. When you turn it into an active movement that's political, and also transgenderism is a whole different ballgame from gay, and that's a different discussion for us. But it is important to note that it's not just that Amir Ohana and his husband are standing next to Prime Minister Netanyahu and his wife, and but Trump again is against woke, but he would have no problem of having somebody gay. The issue is what side of the political, spiritual, cultural divide are you on? And religious, by the way, are you on? And that is why I think it's good that you pointed that photo out.
The other thing I want to say was something which made us both smile, is when Trump said to turn to the president of Israel, who has the power. We have a ceremonial president. Yes, the Israeli president, is a ceremonial figure. He's like the king of England. He doesn't have real political power, but he does have the power of the pardon. And usually he gives the pardon after the government has asked him formally to do so. The president, once again, it's not like the American president or the French president. He is a ceremonial figure. But Trump turns to him in the middle of the Knesset debate, and off script, it's not on his teleprompter. He says, maybe you should give Netanyahu a pardon. And he says,
Pardon.
a pardon, sorry. Give Netanyahu a pardon. And that's because he says, look, this is a great wartime leader. And what he's accused of is trivia. And why is this going on? This is just unfair. And I thought, if talk of all that Netanyahu and Trump have in common, they both genuinely feel, yes, that the justice system was politicized against them. Whether that's true or not true is beside the point. The point is that they both have this common thing that political opponents have utilized the judicial system in an unfair way against them. And I've got no doubt that brings them together also.
Oh, for sure. I just think that you don't need to equivocate.
You know me.
No, the judicial system was turned against them. It was lawfare against them. They're bogus charges, both of them. It's not just they felt that way. It is that way. So now, it's true that what's funny about his having said to Herzog, just give him a pardon, is that in fact, Netanyahu doesn't want a pardon, because a pardon means you were guilty of a crime, and he is fighting to say, no, I'm not guilty of it. But what was even funnier is the way he said, the way Trump said, come on, cigars and champagne, who the hell cares? That's what he said, who the hell cares? And everybody laughed in the Knesset, even those who are out to get Netanyahu. They laughed because it was funny, because he is funny.
And maybe true. Maybe true.
First of all, it is true.
Yeah.
Then, and he said he's the greatest wartime leader. He said president, though Bibi is a prime minister. Greatest wartime leader in history, something like that. And I think that it's aside from the fact that let all those Arab countries and all those and Europe, let them all hear it, okay? Because they're all trying to kiss Trump's butt now. And why? Because they know they have something to gain. And rightly so. I don't have a problem with having self-interest be the reason that people do the right thing. Okay? And that's fine with me if Trump's awarding these countries various things, aid or whatever, if it actually serves the purpose. But make no mistake, another thing is make no mistake that what we want is for we are hoping that Trump actually knows that the Middle East, that this is global jihad. I mean, he certainly is fighting global jihad in his own country. He certainly says so with illegal immigration. We see that Mamdani is about to become the mayor of New York. He's a communist, he's a socialist, excuse me. And he's also a very, like his wife celebrated October 7th. We're talking about bad people here. That are this mixture of Islamist and communist, and Trump knows very well. So what we have to hope for is that his carrots and sticks work. And when I say work, I mean don't get this fantasy about peace busting out all over. Interests, that's fine as long as Israel's interest is kept up. That's always been my problem with you when you say, well, we have an interest in good relations with this country and that country and the other one. Yes, but they have just as much an interest in relations with us. And we want to make sure that Trump polices that.
And I think Israel's victory in this war, this overwhelming victory in Lebanon against Iran and now in Gaza too, and of course the changes in Syria, that has made peaceful normalization of relations with Arab countries more likely, because people don't make peace with a weak country. People don't make peace with a defeated company. People gravitate towards powerful players. And Israel's strength is the prerequisite, the necessary element for normalization and peace. And Israel's strength on the battlefield has been shown, and Israel's strength diplomatically was shown with Trump's visit. One last point, and with that we have to finish because we're running out of time. You said that Netanyahu doesn't want to pardon because he doesn't want to admit his guilt. I'll remind you that President Ford gave President Nixon a pardon, and Nixon never admitted his guilt, as far as I know. So you don't have to do it. Until next week, we will continue this discussion.
Looking forward to it.